is a prepaid collect call from
Levi Jonathan.
an incarcerated individual at Polk County South Jail. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept charges and consent to this recorded call, press 1. To refuse charges, press "Thank you for using Securus." You may start the conversation now.
Praise Jah. Amos is a prophet who came during the time of Jeroboam II. This makes him one of the older prophets with book-bearing names. Amos's testimony would have came before Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Amos could be the father of Isaiah, as Isaiah is recorded as being the son of Amos, although the spelling is different, and their prophecy was in different regions. They did exist around the same time. It appears that some of the account of Jeroboam II is lost or hidden. The brief account found in the second book of Kings references the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel as additional reading about Jeroboam II. However, the Common Bible only provides for Chronicles of Judah within the exception of Ahab, whose story ties into Jehoshaphat's. The first king of the Israelite nation after the time of Solomon was Jeroboam I, whose notorious rule made Israel to sin and became the model of his successors, one of whom was Jeroboam II, who came some 160 years later. The Bible says Jeroboam II ruled for 41 years. This makes him the longest reigning king of Israel in the Old Testament, and very likely means that Jeroboam's rule was materially successful. It is said that Jeroboam II was a kind of savior for Israel. Prior to his reign was a time of conflict when both Israel and Judah were threatened by neighboring tribes. The king of Judah, Joash, had paid tribute to the Syrian king, while the Israelites were in bondage to the Syrians during the reign of Jehoahaz, grandfather of Jeroboam II. Jehoahaz besought Lord in this time of trouble, and Lord heard his plea by providing a liberator. Although some of the captured cities were recovered by Jehoahaz's son, Jehoash, the one who is credited with being the real hero is Jeroboam. His rule marked an era of prosperity for Israel not seen since the time of Solomon. Two major territories were recovered for Israel, Hamath and Damascus, a testimony that Israel's terrain had reached into distant regions. Even Jerusalem had been ransacked by the Israelites, who would be living in houses of ivory. Israel was on top of the world. Who could come against them? It was during this time that Amos, a small-time shepherd and self-described gatherer of sycamore fruit, prophesied of a coming disaster for Israel. Hear this word that Lord has spoken against you, O children of Israel. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore will I punish you for your iniquities. Amos tells of a nation that has prospered at the expense of the sufferer, having sold the righteous for silver and the poor for a pair of shoes. The The wealth of the nation was built on labor that was driven by inequality. It was an oppressive state. Those that wanted a piece of the action best find a way to appease the upper class, while the upper class would buy off any potential threat to their security. The Nazarites were fed wine. The prophets were told not to prophesy. For all this, Amos insisted the nation was doomed. He defiantly brought his message to Bethel, the place of ritual sacrifice. It is apparent that the Israelites had fallen into a state of existence where they believed in a mechanical approach to worship, devoid of spirituality. They thought it was their hand that saved them, not the hand of Jah Almighty. Amos said they were wrong. It was not their hand that would save them, neither would it be the hand of Jah this time around. Come to Bethel and transgress. Offer a sacrifice with leaven. Publish your free will offerings. What Amos is saying is outward sacrifice is not acceptable without a change from within. It has been said that Jah chastises who Jah loves. What father would go on suffering his child to do wrong when he could set his child straight? Yet the children don't always listen to the father. So it is as Amos says, prepare to meet your God. Let us listen to the Father, Emperor Haile Selassie, born October 6, 1963, on the eve of Naguse Day, in an address to the UN Assembly, gives this warning to the nations of the world to change their ways. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, 27 years ago, as Emperor of Ethiopia, I mounted a rostrum in Geneva, Switzerland, to address the League of Nations and to appeal for relief from the destruction which has been unleashed against my defenseless nation by the fascist invader. I spoke then both to and for the conscience of the world. My words went unheeded, as history testifies. Today, I stand before the world organization that has succeeded to the mantle discarded by discredited predecessor. In this body is the principle of collective security I unsuccessfully sought at Geneva. Here in this assembly reposes the best, perhaps the last, hope for the survival peacefully of mankind. In 1936, I declared that it was not the covenant of the League that was at stake, yet international morality. Undertakings, I said then, are of little worth if the will to keep them is lacking. The Charter of the United Nations expresses the noblest aspirations of man: abjuration of force in the settlement of disputes between states, the assurance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex,
You have 1 minute left.
language, or religion, the safeguarding of international peace and security. These two, as were the phrases of the covenant, are only words. Their value depends wholly on our will to observe and honor them and give them content and meaning. The preservation of peace and the guaranteeing of man's basic freedoms and rights require courage and eternal vigilance. Courage to speak and act, and if necessary, to suffer and die. For truth and justice, eternal vigilance, that the least transgression of international morality shall not go undetected and unremedied.
The call.
These lessons must be learned anew by each succeeding generation. And that generation is fortunate indeed that learns from other than its own bitter experience. This organization and each of its members bear a crushing and awesome responsibility to absorb the wisdom of history and to apply it to the problems of the present, in order that future generations may be born and live and pass on in peace. The record of the United Nations during the few short years of its life affords mankind a solid basis for encouragement and hope for the future. The United Nations has dared to act when the League dared not in Palestine, in Korea, in Suez, in the Congo. There is not one among us today who does not conjecture upon the reaction of this body when motives and actions are called into question. The opinion of this organization today acts as a powerful influence upon the decisions of its members. The spotlight of world opinion focused by the United Nations upon the transgressions of the renegades of human society has this far proved an effective safeguard against unchecked aggression and unrestricted violation of human rights. The United Nations continues to serve as the forum where nations whose interests clash may lay their cases before world opinion. It still provides the essential escape valve, for without the slow buildup of pressures would have long since resulted in catastrophic explosion. Its actions and decisions have speeded the achievement of freedom by many peoples on the continents of Africa and Asia. Its efforts have contributed to the advancement of the standard of living peoples in all corners of the world. For this, all men must give thanks. As I stand here today, how faint, how remote are the memories of 1936. How different in 1963 are the attitudes of men. We then existed in an atmosphere of suffocating pessimism. Today, cautious yet buoyant optimism is the prevailing spirit. Still, each one of us here knows that what has been accomplished is not enough. The United Nations judgments have been and continue to be subject to frustration, as individual member states have ignored its pronouncements and disregarded its recommendations. The organization's sinews have been weakened, as member states have shirked their obligations to it. The authority of the organization has been mocked, as individual member states have proceeded in violation of its commands to pursue their own aims. The troubles which continue to plague us virtually all arise among member states of the organization. Yet the organization remains impotent to enforce acceptable solutions. As the maker and enforcer of international law, what the United Nations has achieved still falls regrettably short of our goal of an international community of nations. This does not mean that the United Nations has failed. I have lived too long to cherish many illusions about the essential high-mindedness of men when brought into stark confrontation with the issue of control over their security and their property interests. Not even now, when so much is at hazard, would many nations willingly entrust their destinies to other hands. Yet, this is the ultimatum presented to us. Secure the conditions whereby men will entrust their security to a larger entity or risk annihilation. Persuade men that their salvation rests in the subordination of national and local interests to the interests of humanity, or endanger man's future. These are the objectives. Yesterday, unobtainable. Today, essential. We must labor to achieve. Until this is accomplished, mankind's future remains hazardous and permanent peace a matter for speculation. There is no single magic formula, no one simple step, no words, whether written into the organization's charter or into a treaty between states, which can automatically guarantee to us what we seek. Peace is a day-to-day problem, the product of a multitude of events and judgments. Peace is not an is, it is a becoming. We cannot escape the dreadful possibility of catastrophe by miscalculation. What we can do is reach the right decisions on the myriad subordinate problems each day poses, and we can thereby make our contribution, and perhaps the most that can be reasonably expected of us in 1963, to the preservation of peace. It is here that the United Nations has served us, not perfectly, yet well, and in enhancing the possibilities that the organization may serve us better, we serve and bring closer our most cherished goals. I would mention briefly today two particular issues of deep concern to all men: disarmament and the establishment of true equality. Disarmament has become the urgent imperative of our time. I do not say this because I equate the absence of arms to peace, or because I believe that bringing an end to the nuclear arms race guarantees peace, or because the elimination of nuclear warheads from the arsenals of the world will bring in its wake that change in attitude requisite to the peaceful settlement of disputes between nations. Disarmament is vital today, quite simply, because of the immense destruction capacity of which men dispose. Ethiopia supports the Atmospheric Nuclear Test Ban Treaty as a step towards this goal. Even though only a partial step, nations can still perfect weapons of mass destruction by underground testing. There is no guarantee against the sudden, unannounced resumption of testing in the atmosphere. The real significance of the treaty is that it admits of a tactic stalemate between the nations that negotiated it. A stalemate that recognizes the blunt, unavoidable fact that none would emerge from the total destruction which would be the lot of all in a nuclear war. A stalemate that affords us and the United Nations a breathing space to act. Here, our opportunity and our challenge. If the nuclear powers are prepared to declare a truce, let us seize the moment to strengthen the institutions and procedures that will serve as the means for the pacific settlement of disputes among men. Conflicts between nations will continue to arise. The real issue is whether they are to be resolved by force or by resort to peaceful methods and procedures administered by impartial institutions. This very organization itself is the greatest such institution, and it is in a more powerful United Nations that we seek, and it is here that we shall find the assurance of a peaceful future. Were a real and effective disarmament achieved, and the funds now spent in the arms race devoted to the amelioration of man's state, were we to concentrate only on the peaceful uses of nuclear knowledge, how vastly and in how short a time might we change the conditions of mankind? This should be our goal. When we talk of the equality of man, we find also a challenge and an opportunity. A challenge to breathe new life into the ideals inscribed in the Charter. An opportunity to bring men closer to freedom and true equality, and thus closer to a love of peace. The goal of the equality of man we seek is the antithesis of the exploitation of one people by another from what the pages of history, and in particular those written of the African and Asian continents, speak. Exploitation, thus viewed, has many faces. Whatever guise it assumes, this evil is to be shunned where it does not exist and crushed where it does. It is the sacred duty of this organization to ensure that the dream of equality is finally realized for all men to whom it is still denied, to guarantee that exploitation is not reincarnated in other forms and places whence it has already been banished. As a free Africa has emerged during the past decade, a fresh attack has been launched against exploitation, wherever it still exists. And in that interaction so common to history, this in turn has stimulated and encouraged the remaining dependent peoples to renew their efforts to throw off the yoke which has oppressed them, and to claim as their birthright the twin ideals of liberty and equality. This very struggle is a struggle to establish peace, and until victory is assured, that brotherhood and understanding that nourish and give life to peace can be but partial and incomplete. In the United States of America, the administration of President Kennedy is leading a vigorous attack to eradicate the remaining vestige of racial discrimination from this country. We know that this conflict will be won and that right will triumph. In this time of trial, these efforts should be encouraged and assisted, and we should lend our support. Last May, in Addis Ababa, I convened a meeting of the heads of African states and governments. In 3 days, the 32 nations represented at that conference demonstrated to the world that when the will and determination exists, nations and peoples of diverse backgrounds can and will work together in unity to the achievement of common goals and the assurance of that equality and brotherhood we desire. On the question of racial discrimination, the Addis Ababa Conference taught to those who will learn this further lesson, that until
You have 1 minute left.
the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Until the ignoble and unhappy regimes that hold our brothers
Thank you for using
subhuman bondage have been toppled and destroyed, until bigotry and prejudice and malicious and inhumane self-interest have been replaced by understanding and tolerance and goodwill, until all Africans stand and speak as free beings, equal in the eyes of all men, as they are in the eyes of Jah, Creator. Until that day, the African continent will not know peace. We Africans will fight if necessary, and we know that we shall win, as we are confident in Jah victory, good over evil.